the agenda for today is, first we are going to go over elasticity like I told you last time. Okay, there are no videos to watch for elasticity, so make sure you are taking the notes carefully. It's a very short part because I am just doing the stuff that you need for later on. We are not going to go into the details of elasticity, and that's precisely the reason that I am also not giving you lecture notes, because the lecture notes that I have are more detailed and I don't want you to look at stuff that you don't need. So we are not going to do the numerical calculations and stuff. Certain things you will just have to take on face value, but that is okay. That's all that you need. Okay. Now, if I am talking about elasticity, what do you understand by the term elasticity? Just the English word elasticity. Whether something is stretchable or not, right? Flexibility. So if I just take this and I try to stretch it, it is stretchable, right? And if I leave it, it comes back to its place, whereas if I do the same thing to this marker, it's not stretchable, right? It's not coming back. I exert the same amount of force, but it does not yield, right? So basically elasticity is, and this is, I am not a science student, but still if I apply some force, whether that thing becomes flexible, whether it stretches or not due to that force, right? Stretches and comes back when the force is removed. And if something is inelastic, then by applying that same force, it will not stretch, it will just not yield, it will stay as it is. So there are two things here. First, the stretchability coming back to its own place after stretching, and secondly the force, right? It is the same concept applied to economics, and it is the same concept that is applied to demand that you have been studying in lecture note 2. So here we are talking about the elasticity of demand or the elasticity of quantity demanded for a certain good or service. Okay? The elasticity, we are looking at the elasticity of quantity demanded. Okay. Now your question will be that if you are looking at quantity demanded, what do you mean by flexibility or stretchability of this quantity demanded? So by elasticity of quantity demanded, I mean its responsiveness. So far we have been saying demand goes up, demand goes down, supply goes up, supply goes down. But we have not answered the question to what extent, how much, what is the change in demand, right? This is answering that question, that how much is that demand change, or in other words, when there is a shift of the demand curve, to what extent is that changing, to what extent is that shift taking place. Okay? Now here the force that is applied, so we were also talking about a force, so that means the responsiveness must be to some kind of stimulus, some kind of outside thing happening there, right? We talk about three kinds of forces or three kind of changes which triggers this responsiveness. Okay? The first is the own price of the good, P own. The second is the price of a related good, could be a substitute or a complement, and the third one is the income of the buyer. We look at these three important forces. Okay? So that means in this chapter I am looking at how responsive is the quantity demanded for a certain change in the own price of the good or the service. How responsive is the quantity demanded of a good due to a change in the price of a related good? How responsive is the quantity demanded of that good due to a change in the income of the buyer? Those are the three things that we are studying here. Okay? The first one, which is the most commonly used term under elasticity, it is also denoted as EP, is also called the price elasticity of demand or the own price elasticity of demand. Some textbooks call it own price, others will just call it price elasticity. Price elasticity of demand. The second one is denoted as EC, and that is called the cross price elasticity of demand. And the third one denoted as EM, the reason being in economics usually income is denoted by capital M, money, income, okay, EM, and this is called the income elasticity of demand. Okay. Now similarly on the supply side, this is about the demand side. On the supply side, you could also have the own price elasticity of supply or price elasticity of supply, which is denoted as ES, okay, and that would just be called price elasticity of supply. But please note that on the supply side, when we are talking about price elasticity of the supply, we are looking at the responsiveness of QS or quantity supplied. We are not looking at the responsiveness of quantity demanded, right, because quantity supplied is the relevant thing on the supply side. Okay. So, ES is about the responsiveness of QS due to a change in the own price of the good. Okay, so it is basically a counterpart of EP, but on the supply side. Is that okay? Now let's kind of go over these three one by one.
So ES wouldn't be number 4? Just a different factor?
It's just the counterpart of number 1 on the supply side. So now what is basically mathematically, what is EP? If I try to give a mathematical formulation, what is EP? EP is basically the percentage change in quantity demanded due to a percentage change in price, and by price I mean the own price in case of number 1. It is a percentage change in quantity demanded due to a percentage change in price. Okay. Now by change it could be an increase or it could be a decrease. Okay. Now let's say there is a certain percentage increase in the price. There is a percentage increase, whatever, 5%, 2%, but that's an increase. There is a percentage increase in the price. Due to that, there will be a percentage increase or decrease in quantity demanded. Decrease, right, because the law of demand would hold. Ceteris paribus, the law of demand would hold. If you have a certain increase in price, then obviously you will have a certain decrease in the quantity demanded. So there will be a percentage decrease in the quantity demanded, isn't it? So that means the denominator in this case is a positive change, right, whereas the numerator, all of you understand numerator denominator, right. So the denominator here is a positive change, the numerator is a negative change, right. If you have a negative number over a positive number, will you get a negative value or a positive value? Negative, right, negative over positive, you will get a negative value. Similarly, if you had a decrease in price, if there was a certain percentage decrease in the price, then you would have a percentage increase in the quantity demanded, and that is just law of demand, ceteris paribus, right. In that case, your denominator would be a negative number, your numerator would be a positive number. An increase, that means a positive thing, a decrease, that means a negative thing. Once again, you have a positive over a negative, which means you would end up getting a negative value, correct. What does that mean? That means no matter what kind of percentage change you are looking at, whether you are looking at an increase in the price or you are looking at the decrease in price, and hence the responsiveness of quantity demanded, it will always be a negative number. So EP EP is always less than 0. It's always a negative number. Okay? But we are not concerned about that negative number. We don't care about that negative number because it's always going to be negative. So we don't draw any conclusions or inferences based on that negative sign. We draw inferences based on the absolute value, which means we ignore the negative sign. We ignore the negative sign, we do not look at the sign, and we just look at the number, we look at the numerical value. That just means a mod, which means we look at the absolute value by ignoring the negative sign. And we say that if this EP is greater than 1, then that is an elastic good or price elastic good. Okay. That means if I get a value of -5, that would qualify as elastic. Okay. If EP or absolute value of EP is exactly equal to 1, then it means unit elastic, and I will tell you what each one means. Unit elastic. And if the absolute value of EP is less than 1, something like, let's say, negative 0.5, then I am ignoring the negative sign, just looking at that 0.5, which is less than 1, then this good would be an inelastic good. Okay. Now, what do I mean by elastic, inelastic and unit elastic? By elastic, I mean that for a certain percentage change in the price, there is a greater percentage change in the quantity demanded. So that means if you change the price, if you increase the price by 1%, your quantity demanded goes down by more than 1%. That is what elastic means. Okay? Or if you decrease the price by 1%, then your quantity demanded increases by more than 1%. So elasticity basically means that your quantity demanded is more responsive to the price change. So that means for a certain change in the price, you have a higher change in the quantity demanded. So let's say you have 1% increase in price. Then
Inelastic means or elastic?
Elastic. You have 1% change in price. Then your quantity demanded changes by more than 1%. Okay? Law of demand still holds, ceteris paribus. So if you have a 1% increase in price, then your quantity demanded should decrease by more than 1%. And if you have a 1% decrease in price, then your quantity demanded should increase by more than 1%. So the inverse relationship still holds. The law of demand between these two still holds, ceteris paribus. But we are just talking about the extent of the change of quantity demanded for a change in the price. Is that clear? Yeah? So what kind of goods do you think would be these price elastic goods? Can you think of an example? Most goods that you see around yourself, right? Clothes, cars. For a certain change in the price, there is a higher change in the quantity demanded. Those goods are very responsive to the price change, right? Most goods that you see around yourself, your groceries, if the price goes down, you immediately go and buy more of it. If the price goes up, then you probably start saving on those goods, you don't spend as much, and usually the quantity change is higher than the price change. Now there is a numerical formula for calculating that in economics. We will not go into that calculation in this class. Okay? That's called the midpoint formula. We will not go into it. We will just remember that if I get a value, that value will always be negative because the law of demand holds. They will always be in the opposite direction. So we will always get a negative value. But we will ignore the negative value and just look at the absolute value. If that absolute value is greater than 1, it's elastic, which just means that the quantity change is higher than the price change. Okay? If it is unit elastic, it means the quantity change and the price change are exactly equal. Right? Then the numerator and the denominator would cancel each other and you would get 1. For a 5% change in price, you have a 5% change in quantity demanded. So the 5 and 5 would cancel out and you would get 1. That is what I mean, unit elastic, right? Now for inelastic, it means for a certain percentage change in price, you have a lower percentage change in the quantity demanded, right? So if you have a 1% decrease in the price, you have less than 1% increase in the quantity demanded. So what goods are we talking about when we say inelastic? Can you think of something? Exactly. Something like salt, let's say. If the price goes down, you don't start putting more of salt in your food, right? And hence your consumption would not go up by more than the price change, because you don't start consuming more. Your consumption stays fixed at a certain point, the necessities. What would you think about medicines? Are they price elastic or inelastic? Prescription medicines. Price inelastic, because even if the prices are slashed, it is not like you start having 5 pills instead of 1. You still have your prescribed dosage, right? So the medicines are also a good example, prescription medicines are good example of price inelastic. Now we are not talking about pathological cases. Remember, there may be people having medicines for other purposes than their, health. We are not talking about those people. We are just talking about people who are having medicines for a certain health condition. They are not going to start having more doses of the medicine just because the price has gone down, correct? What about physician services, elastic or inelastic?
Yes, it depends on your health condition, right?
Let's say for a patient, I have a health condition.
Depends how much it affects you. If it's a minor condition, you may wait.
So compared to prescription medication, is it elastic or inelastic? More elastic compared to prescription medication. It's not like you will, just because the doctor has slashed the fees, you don't start go seeing the doctor every day unless you have some other kind of inclination towards the doctor, right? you don't go every day, but you may be going for more office visits, right? If the price was really high and your situation is not an emergency, then you would probably think twice before going for an office visit. But if it is, if you know that the prices, the fees of the doctor has gone down, and we are assuming ceteris paribus, right? So nothing else is in the picture, insurance, this and that, we are not bringing all those things into the box yet. If you know the doctor's fees have gone down and you have a health condition, you would probably consider going for more office visits. See? So compared to medication, we are saying that physician services would probably be more elastic. Now, one thing that I want to mention here, we are going to go over all these different kind of healthcare goods like drugs, pharmaceutical products, physician services, nurses. We are going to go over all those goods separately in different chapters in the latter part of the semester. But initially when we start off, specifically from next Tuesday, when we get into health economics, when I say healthcare, I am actually clubbing all these goods together and putting them under one big good. So when I say healthcare, it could mean physician services, it could mean the services of a nurse, it could mean medicines, okay, it could mean surgical procedures. First couple of weeks we are going to deal with healthcare as one single good in the macro sense, okay. Later we are going to look at the different dimensions of healthcare. So right now if we just talk about healthcare, it is probably in this category, right. If you think about healthcare and clothes, they are probably, compared to clothes, healthcare is definitely inelastic, right. The price of clothes go down, especially women, they will run to malls to buy clothes, right. It will be a higher percentage change. But for medicines or doctors, it is not as much. Even if the price goes down, you don't start running to the doctor or you don't start getting yourself admitted in a hospital or buying more of prescription drugs, correct. So compared to these goods that you see around yourself, it is inelastic. So, to begin with, we will consider that the big good that we are considering healthcare, that is in this category, inelastic, price inelastic. Okay? Is that clear? Now, if I looked at the same thing from the supplier side, if I looked at that same thing from the supplier side, this would just be the percentage change in quantities supplied divided by the percentage change in the own price of the good. Would this be a negative number? Would ES be a negative number? How many are saying that ES is going to be a negative number? Why would it be a negative number? It will always be a positive number because it will follow the law of supply. If there is an increase in the price, the quantity supplied is always going to increase. That's law of supply, isn't it? So, up and up, both going up. Similarly, if the price goes down, quantity supplied always goes down. So, if there is a fall in the price, there will be a fall in quantity supplied. So, we don't need to worry about that on the supplier side. It's always going to be a positive number. Okay? So, you don't really, it doesn't matter whether you don't really have to ignore the sign, but we still say that we take the absolute value, we look at the absolute value. And just like on the demand side, if it's greater than 1, you would say it is the price, it is the supply elasticity is elastic, right? If it's less than 1, then it is price inelastic. The quantity supplied is price inelastic. If it's equal to 1, then the quantity supplied is unit elastic. So, all that would hold, but just that here you are always going to get a positive number, and here your numerator is different. Here you are looking at quantity supplied, whereas there you are looking at quantity demanded. Okay? Now, this is just for you to remember. We are probably not going to talk about quantity supply, we are probably not going to talk about the price elasticity of supply as much. We will mostly talk about the price elasticity of demand. But before that, let us go into the next one, which is EC. Can everyone see if I write here? Probably not, right? You guys are behind the computer. So, EC, it's the percentage change in quantity demanded. So, the numerator is exactly the same as this one. It's the percentage change in the quantity demanded for the good in question due to the percentage change in the price of another good. Okay? So, if you compare between EC and EP, the numerator is exactly the same. We are measuring the percentage change in quantity demanded. Here you are looking at the responsiveness towards the change in its own price, whereas there you are looking at the responsiveness towards the change in the price of some other good. Okay? Is that clear? Now, if EC is positive, if EC is greater than 0, now this could be greater than 0, could be less than 0, because this is not about law of demand, remember, because it is not the own price. Law of demand only holds when the relationship is between the quantity demanded and the own price of the good, non-price factors remaining the same, correct? But here it is not about law of demand, because here this price is a non-price factor, it is the price of the related good, so it falls under tribe, correct? So, now this EC could be greater than 0, or EC could be less than 0. If EC is greater than 0, if it is a positive number, then this good, the price of the good that we are talking about, that is a substitute. Okay. Right? That means what are we saying? We are saying that if there is a increase, if there is a percentage increase in the price of good B, then there is a percentage increase in the quantity demanded of good A. And that is exactly what you saw when you did the demand chapter. You remember, between the price of the substitute and the demand for the good in question, there was a direct relationship. When the price of the substitute goes up, the demand for your good, the good in question, goes up. There was a direct relationship. That means whenever there is going to be an increase in the price of the substitute, you will see an increase in the quantity demanded for the good in question. It is going to be positive, correct? Similarly, if you see a decrease in the price of the substitute, you will see a decrease in the quantity demanded for the good in question. That is exactly what you saw in lecture note 2. Now, we are just giving it more logic. We are trying to say that, let's say, to begin with, we do not know whether it is a substitute or not. We just do not know whether these two goods that I have, A and B, I do not know whether they are related goods, and I do not know whether they are substitutes or complements. In that case, I can just look at these numbers. I can look at the percentage change in the quantity demanded of good A for a percentage change in the quantity demanded for good B, and if that number turns out to be positive, then I know for sure that that good is substitute. Similarly, if EC was a negative number, so in this case you cannot ignore the negative value. You still have to take the negative value in consideration. If that is a negative value, then that is a complement. Okay. And each time I am assuming that the own price of the good is constant. So, I am still assuming ceteris paribus, but in this case ceteris paribus would mean that the price of the good itself is constant. There is no change there. Okay. I am just looking at how responsive is the quantity demanded due to the change in the price of another good. Okay. And let us say, to begin with, I do not know whether that good is related or not. In that case, how would I know if it is a substitute or a complement? In this case, if there is an increase in the price of the related good, let us say there is an increase in the price of the related good, due to which there is a decrease in the quantity demanded for the good in question. So, you can see it is an inverse relationship, right? And that inverse relationship will only hold if the two goods are complements to each other. That is exactly what you know from lecture note 2. We have done that part, correct? Wine and cheese, that same example. If the price of cheese goes up, then people are not going to consume as much cheese, but at the same time they are also not going to consume wine, because they consume the two together. So, for a positive change in the price of cheese, you will see a negative change in the quantity demanded for wine. Okay? And the same thing would hold in the opposite direction. If there was a decrease in the price for which you had an increase in the quantity demanded, then once again that inverse relationship would mean that we are referring to a complement good. Is that clear? So, for you to remember is that if this is a positive number, it is a substitute. If this is a negative number, it is a complement. And what I am telling you here, even if you do not remember, that is fine, because that is just I am trying to logically prove that that is true. Okay. Is that clear? Okay. Now, moving on, going to income elasticity. Income elasticity, once again you have the same numerator, that is percentage change in quantity demanded divided by a percentage change in income. It is a percentage change in income, and I am denoting income by capital M. That is how we denote income in economics. It is a percentage change in income. So, across all three, EP, EM and EC, you have the same numerator. It is the percentage change in quantity demanded. The denominators are different depending on which response you are measuring. Okay? So, if you see, if this is a positive number, if EM is a positive number, what does that mean? That means that if income goes up, if there is an increase in the income, there is an increase in the quantity demanded. So, what kind of goods are these? So, it is a normal good, right? If there is an increase in income, there is an increase in the quantity demanded. And if there is a decrease in the income, there is a decrease in the quantity demanded, correct? So, those are normal goods. And similarly, if you have the value of EM is less than 0, then they would be inferior, because that means that if you have an increase in income, you have a decrease in the quantity demanded from lecture note 2. And if you have a decrease in income, you have an increase in the quantity demanded. That is exactly what we studied about inferior goods in lecture note 2. So, now you have kind of a mathematical basis for that. If you do not know to begin with, if you do not know whether the good is inferior or not, and that usually happens in the market, how can you say whether a good is inferior or not? Why should you believe somebody if that person comes up and tells you that this is inferior? You calculate that and you get to the inference whether the good is normal or inferior. Okay. So, now that is giving you a basis. Now, what if, so we consider these negative values. What if the EM is greater than 1? What does that mean? EM greater than 1. When do you get greater than 1? In a fraction, when is a fraction greater than 1? This is a fraction, right? It is a numerator divided by denominator. So, this is a fraction. When is a fraction greater than 1? When the numerator is greater than the denominator, right? That is when numerically the value of a fraction is greater than 1. Now, here if the numerator is greater, it means that for a certain percentage change in income, you have a greater percentage change in the quantity demanded, isn't it? Correct? So, can I say that EM greater than 1 implies that the percentage change in the quantity demanded is greater than the percentage change in income? Can I say that? And I am trying to cramp here, please do not get upset, the online students, you will get the class notes. So, you will be good. I am trying to write on the left hand side of the board. So, if EM is greater than 1, it just means that the numerator there is greater than the denominator. Only then you can get the value of the fraction as greater than 1. So, what does that mean? That means for 1% change in income, there is more than 1% change in the quantity demanded. So, what kind of goods are these? That means you are extremely responsive, your demand is extremely responsive. What are cars? What category goods are those? Luxury goods? Luxury goods, right? For a small change in income, you have a higher change in the demand for those goods. These are luxury goods, okay? Because why are you so responsive? Because these goods take up a large part of your income. They are a large part of your income. So, that is why for those goods, when your income changes by a small amount, your quantity demanded responds by a much larger amount. Those are the luxury goods. Please write that down, I do not have space. Those are the luxury goods. Similarly, if you have EM less than 1, then that means that this numerator has to be lower than the denominator, only then the fraction can be less than 1, something like half, 1 by 2, 1 is smaller than 2. So, there the percentage change in quantity demanded, the numerator has to be less than the percentage change in the income, only then it can be less than 1. That means, if you have a change in income, your quantity demanded changes by less than the change in income. So, these goods are basically the necessities, the necessary goods. Okay. If your income changes by 1%, you probably do not start buying 2% extra salt, right? You still buy the same amount. So, those are the necessary goods. So, now whatever you studied in lecture note 2, lecture note 3 is you do not have a lecture note, but this is just giving you, this chapter is basically giving you a numerical logic to all that you studied in lecture note 2. Okay. Do you have any questions for me? Okay. Now let me concentrate on just this EP. Let me concentrate on this EP because that is what we are going to talk about most in the next chapters, next few chapters.
So if that whole luxury good versus normal inferior good, if we saw something that we would need to figure this out, would we get a graph or would we just get numbers?
Thankfully for you, you don't have to figure out. You will not get any question where you have to figure out. Okay? That's why I am not teaching you how to numerically calculate it. But why I am telling you about this? Because whatever you studied in lecture note 2, so that you don't think that economics is abstract, but it is way too abstract. It's just giving some basis, some foundation to whatever you studied in lecture note 2. That how do you figure out? Because you know, for me, I could say orange juice and vodka are complements for me, right? I have vodka with orange juice, but for you it may be a substitute. Alcoholic versus non-alcoholic, right? So how do I know what it is? Now coming to the part that what do you need exactly for your healthcare economics, what do you need? That okay, I know EP greater than 1 is elastic, EP less than 1 is inelastic, but we have been drawing so many graphs and you told us that healthcare is inelastic compared to something else, compared to clothes maybe. But if I look at the graph, how do I know that I am dealing with an inelastic good? If I look at a demand curve in the picture, like Josh said, how do I know that it is elastic or inelastic? That means the demand curve for an elastic good should look different from a demand curve for an inelastic good. And then if you tell me that this looks different, then why is one for elastic and the other for inelastic? Okay? Let's draw two kinds of demand curves. Okay, what is the difference between the two demand curves? Let me call them D1 and D2 to distinguish them. What is the difference between D1 and D2? Just visually. The slope is different, right? They are both downward sloping. So that means they both represent law of demand. They do not violate the law of demand. They still show me the inverse relationship between Q and P, but one is steeper than the other. D2 is a steeper curve than D1, correct? Now let me say that there is a change in the price. So let's say initially the price is P1 and that P1 price holds in both cases for both demand curves, that P1 price level holds, and then there is a change in the demand, there is a change in the price, and let me consider that there is an increase. And we have that same increase holding in both the diagrams. That means I am taking the same price change in both cases. So this is still P1, that is still P2, right? So that means in both the diagrams, the change between from P1 to P2, the increase from P1 to P2 should be the same percentage change, correct? Isn't it? How do you find out percentage change? One minus the other divided by the original, new minus original divided by original, that is percentage change, right? We are not going into the numerical calculations, but what we are saying is that this percentage change is the same as that percentage change, right? Now as a result of that increase, what should happen? You should have a movement along the demand curve such that your quantity demanded should now go down from Q1 to Q2, that is just law of demand. You studied in lecture note 2. Similarly here, you should have the same upward movement along the demand curve so that your quantity demanded should still go down from Q1 to Q2, correct? Now what has happened? For the same percentage change, you have a smaller quantity change in the second diagram, whereas here you have a bigger change. This is a bigger change just visually, whereas that is a smaller change. correct? That means, can I say that in diagram 2, in the second figure, the quantity demand is less responsive to the price change than the quantity demand in the first diagram? Can I say that? So, if that is true, can I say that EP here must be less than 1? Or in other words, this must be relatively more inelastic? That is exactly how we defined inelastic. And here the EP must be greater than 1 or it must be more elastic. Is that correct? Yes. Because that is exactly how we defined inelastic. Inelastic is for a certain percentage change in the price, you have a smaller percentage change in quantity demanded. And whereas elastic is for a certain percentage change in price, you have a large quantity, you have a larger quantity change, right? So, that means if I had these two diagrams, if I had the demand curve for these two, if I had the demand curve for two goods, then I just by looking at the demand curve, I can say that D2 is for a good which is price inelastic, whereas D1 is for a good which is price elastic. Can I say that? So, that means if I am dealing with healthcare, what kind of demand curve do I expect to see? D2, that means the demand curve, write that down, the demand curve for healthcare is always a steep one, right. So, now do you see why this concept of elasticity is different? Because now as we move into healthcare economics, we are going to move into different kinds of patients, different types of consumers of healthcare. You may be somebody with health insurance, I may be someone without health insurance, right. I may have a chronic condition, you may not have a chronic condition. So, the healthcare market is complex. Complex not just in terms of the goods, but are also complex in terms of consumers. You cannot put them in the same category. Do you see what I am saying?